"Don't even come near me, you're so cringe," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. I had been dating Whitney for 6 months, and this was supposed to be my first time meeting her creative circle at her gallery opening night. I walked into the contemporary art space, feeling genuinely excited to finally see this part of her world she talked about constantly but somehow never included me in. The gallery buzzed with sophisticated conversation about conceptual frameworks and postmodern aesthetics while I made my way toward where Whitney stood near the featured sculptures with her artist friends. I had even dressed up for the occasion, wearing the navy blazer she had once complimented and bringing a small bouquet of flowers from the farmer's market she claimed to love visiting with me on Saturday mornings. I spotted her immediately in her carefully curated black dress and statement jewelry, looking every inch the gallery coordinator she had worked so hard to become over the past year. When I approached her group with a genuine smile and started to say hello, Whitney's face immediately transformed into something between panic and disgust, like I had committed some unforgivable social violation just by existing in her space. She physically stepped away from me like I carried some contagious disease, creating obvious distance while her colleagues watched the interaction with raised eyebrows and barely concealed curiosity about this unexpected drama unfolding. Her words hit me like cold water, especially the way she delivered them with such casual cruelty in front of people whose opinions clearly mattered more to her than my feelings or our relationship. I stood there processing what had just happened while her friend Sage looked uncomfortable and shifted her weight awkwardly, and the others pretended to study the nearby installation piece with sudden intense interest in abstract metal shapes they had probably ignored moments before. Whitney continued explaining to her group that my suburban energy didn't fit the aesthetic she had cultivated among gallery owners and collectors in the local art district, describing me like some kind of cultural contamination that threatened her carefully constructed image. She talked about me like I was some embarrassing relative who had wandered in by mistake rather than her boyfriend of 6 months who had supported her career ambitions, listened to countless stories about these very same people, and even helped her move furniture for previous exhibitions without complaint. The humiliation deepened as I realized this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or some kind of artistic performance, but a calculated decision to protect her reputation in the contemporary art scene where authenticity apparently mattered less than maintaining the right connections and projecting the correct, sophisticated image. I watched her transform into someone completely different around her pretentious colleagues, adopting this affected way of speaking about artistic vision and cultural significance that she never used when we were alone together sharing pizza on my couch or discussing our week while I worked on furniture pieces in my garage workshop. The contrast was jarring, seeing how effortlessly she could switch between the woman who laughed at my woodworking jokes and this polished gallery professional who treated me like an unwelcome intrusion into her carefully curated world. Everything suddenly made sense about why she had been so secretive about her art world connections and why she always found excuses when I suggested attending gallery events together, claiming the timing never worked or that these gatherings were too industry-specific for outsiders to enjoy. I finally understood that she had been systematically ashamed of my background as a small business owner who built custom furniture and kitchen cabinets rather than conceptual installations that challenged societal norms, viewing me as too ordinary and practical for the avant-garde world she desperately wanted to belong to completely. Standing there holding those farmer's market flowers like some kind of fool, I realized that every time she had criticized my interests as too basic or suggested I needed to expand my cultural horizons, she had been trying to mold me into someone who wouldn't embarrass her in moments exactly like this one. The worst part was seeing how naturally the deception came to her, how smoothly she could pretend I didn't exist while discussing the deeper meaning behind sculptures that looked like twisted metal garbage to my untrained suburban eyes. Rather than storming out like my wounded pride demanded, I found myself lingering near the wine station where I could observe Whitney's performance with newfound clarity that felt both enlightening and devastating. I watched her gravitating toward Preston, the successful gallery owner she had mentioned countless times in recent weeks, always with this particular tone of reverence that should have been my first warning sign about her true priorities. She positioned herself strategically within his orbit, discussing conceptual frameworks and artistic movements with the kind of passionate intensity she used to reserve for talking about our weekend plans together before everything changed. Her hand found excuses to touch his sleeve while she laughed at his intellectual jokes about postmodern irony and the commodification of art, displaying this animated enthusiasm that made my chest tighten with recognition and bitter jealousy. The flirtation was obvious to anyone paying attention, from the way she leaned into his personal space to how she nodded along with every pretentious observation he made about emerging artists and market trends in the contemporary gallery scene. I noticed how her voice took on this breathy quality when she agreed with his theories about cultural significance, the same tone she used to use when she wanted something from me, except now it was directed towards someone who could actually advance her career aspirations. When Preston's wife arrived 20 minutes later from parking their car in the crowded downtown district, Whitney's entire demeanor shifted instantly like someone had flipped a switch, transforming from seductive admirer to politely professional colleague making forced small talk about upcoming exhibitions and community outreach programs. The calculation was breathtaking in its efficiency, watching her seamlessly transition between these different versions of herself depending on who was present and what advantages each interaction might provide. I connected this manipulative behavior to her recent obsession with appearing sophisticated and cultured, her increasing criticism of my basic interests like football games and neighborhood barbecues, and her mysterious insistence that we maintain separate social media accounts because she needed professional boundaries in the art world. The pattern became crystal clear as I remembered how she had started requiring me to pick her up from gallery events rather than arriving together, claiming it looked more professional if she networked independently without personal distractions or relationship complications. She had been systematically positioning herself as single and available to advance her career through strategic relationships, treating our genuine connection like some embarrassing secret that threatened her carefully constructed image in the contemporary art community where perception mattered more than authenticity. Watching her work the room with practiced charm and calculated vulnerability, I realized that every conversation about my lack of cultural sophistication had been preparation for this moment when she could publicly discard me without damaging her reputation among the people who actually mattered to her future success. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut that I had been her dirty secret for months, someone she kept hidden in the suburban shadows while she built relationships with gallery owners, collectors, and artists who could actually help her climb the hierarchy and gain access to exclusive artistic circles that valued connections over genuine talent or character. I decided to approach Whitney one final time, walking across the polished concrete floor with a calmness that surprised even me considering the emotional hurricane spinning inside my chest from her public humiliation. She was still positioned strategically near Preston, gesticulating passionately about some installation piece while he nodded with the kind of indulgent attention that married men give to attractive young women at professional networking events. I waited patiently for a brief pause in their intense conversation about the intersection of technology and human experience in contemporary art, then looked directly into Whitney's eyes with a steady gaze that made her momentarily uncomfortable and uncertain. Without any dramatic flourish or emotional outburst that would have given her ammunition to paint me as unstable or vindictive to her artistic colleagues, I simply said that she was absolutely right about everything before turning toward the gallery exit without offering any explanation or engaging in the kind of public scene she probably expected from a rejected boyfriend. The beauty of my response was its complete simplicity and lack of defensiveness, leaving her with nothing to argue against or manipulate since I had calmly agreed with her brutal assessment of our fundamental incompatibility. Whitney was too absorbed in explaining postmodern theory to Preston and impressing him with her sophisticated knowledge of contemporary artistic movements to notice my departure until her friend Sage mentioned 20 minutes later that I had left the gallery without saying goodbye to anyone or creating any drama. I walked out into the cool evening air feeling progressively lighter with each step away from that suffocating environment where authenticity was treated like a social disease and genuine human connection was routinely sacrificed for networking opportunities and career advancement. The contrast between the artificial atmosphere inside and the honest simplicity of the night air was striking, reminding me of what normal felt like after months of trying to meet Whitney's impossible standards for cultural sophistication. When Whitney finally texted me several hours after the gallery closing with a casual message asking where I had disappeared to, as if my absence was merely an inconvenience rather than a response to her cruelty, I responded with a simple statement that I was somewhere that appreciated me and immediately blocked her across all social media platforms before she could respond with more manipulation. The finality of cutting off all communication felt incredibly liberating, like finally removing a painful splinter that had been bothering me for months without my full awareness of the constant irritation and self-doubt it was causing. I drove directly to my favorite 24-hour bowling alley across town where the night manager Frank greeted me warmly by name and automatically set up my preferred lane without being asked, providing more genuine human connection and recognition in 30 seconds than my girlfriend had offered throughout the entire evening of public rejection. Frank noticed my unusually dressed-up appearance and asked if I was coming from somewhere special, and I found myself laughing genuinely as I explained that I had just escaped from an art gallery opening where I learned that authenticity and suburban energy were apparently considered cringeworthy by people who took themselves far too seriously. The irony wasn't lost on me that this unpretentious working-class bowling alley, with its worn carpet, bright fluorescent lights, and the satisfying sound of pins crashing, felt infinitely more welcoming and honest than the sophisticated gallery space where people spent thousands of dollars on sculptures that resembled industrial accidents. The next day brought the satisfying reality that Whitney's calls went straight to voicemail and her increasingly frantic texts disappeared into the digital void I had created by blocking her completely across every social media platform and communication method. She quickly recruited her friend Sage and our mutual friend Kevin to intervene on her behalf, probably expecting them to convince me that I was overreacting to what she would undoubtedly frame as a simple misunderstanding or momentary lapse in judgment rather than the deliberate public humiliation it actually was. However, I had already shared my perspective with our shared social circle before going completely silent, explaining calmly and rationally to Kevin and two other friends exactly what had happened at the gallery opening and why I was ending the relationship without drama, negotiation, or the possibility of reconciliation. Whitney's increasingly desperate narrative that I had just vanished like an immature coward without any explanation fell apart completely when Kevin revealed to Sage that he knew the full story about the gallery incident and had heard my measured explanation for walking away from someone who was fundamentally ashamed of my existence and background. Her attempts to reach me through my business social media accounts and professional website failed spectacularly when she discovered that I had already updated my relationship status to single and systematically removed all photographic evidence of our connection from my professional profiles and personal accounts. The power balance between us had completely reversed overnight, leaving her desperately seeking closure, explanation, and some way to regain control while I maintained total radio silence and moved forward with my life like she had never existed in it. Kevin later told me with obvious amusement that Whitney had spent hours crafting elaborate messages she couldn't send, alternating between righteous fury at my complete indifference and growing panic at losing control of the situation she had created entirely through her own calculated cruelty and social manipulation. She apparently couldn't comprehend how someone she had publicly rejected and humiliated in front of her professional colleagues could simply disappear without begging for another chance, demanding an explanation, or engaging in the kind of dramatic confrontation that would have fed her ego and confirmed her continued importance in my emotional life. The strategic silence I maintained was infinitely more devastating to her sense of control and self-importance than any angry response or emotional outburst could have been, because it demonstrated conclusively that her opinion of me no longer held any power over my self-worth, decision-making process, or future happiness. I learned through our mutual connections that she had started obsessively checking my social media accounts from her friends' phones and computers, desperately looking for signs that I was suffering, posting anything that referenced our relationship, or showing any indication that her rejection had damaged my confidence or social life. Instead, she found only normal updates about my woodworking projects, weekend activities with friends, and business accomplishments that clearly showed someone moving forward completely and thriving without her influence or presence. Her friends reported to Kevin that she seemed genuinely shocked and disturbed by my ability to cut ties so cleanly and definitively, having apparently expected me to fight desperately for someone who had made it crystal clear that my presence in her life was an embarrassment to be hidden rather than a genuine relationship to be celebrated and shared proudly. Word of Whitney's cruel treatment at the gallery opening spread through the local art community faster than she had anticipated, with several witnesses questioning her character and professionalism after seeing the public rejection and deliberate humiliation of someone who had clearly come to support her career and celebrate her achievements. Preston, who had enjoyed her flirtatious attention and intellectual conversation throughout the evening, began strategically avoiding her at subsequent gallery events when he realized the unnecessary drama and social controversy surrounding her relationship history and her calculated willingness to manipulate people for personal advancement and networking opportunities. Her carefully cultivated reputation in the gallery world suffered significant and lasting damage when Sage accidentally revealed to a prominent curator during a wine-fueled conversation at another opening that Whitney had been systematically hiding her boyfriend to appear single, sophisticated, and available to potential professional connections and influential collectors. The curator, who highly valued authenticity and personal integrity in the artists and coordinators she chose to work with, shared this disturbing information with other influential figures in the local art scene, creating a ripple effect of gossip and speculation that fundamentally undermined Whitney's credibility and trustworthiness among the very people she had sacrificed our relationship to impress and manipulate. Her professional network, which she had worked so hard to build through strategic charm and calculated vulnerability, began to view her with suspicion and distance as word spread about her willingness to deceive and hurt people for career advancement. Meanwhile, I found myself absolutely flourishing without her constant criticism and pretentious demands that had slowly been eroding my confidence and sense of self-worth over the months we had been together. I reconnected enthusiastically with old friends who admitted they had felt genuinely uncomfortable around Whitney's condescending attitude toward anyone outside her precious art world, particularly her tendency to dismiss their interests and accomplishments as culturally inferior or intellectually shallow compared to her sophisticated artistic pursuits. My buddy Marcus, who worked in construction and built beautiful custom homes, told me that Whitney had once patronizingly suggested he should consider taking art appreciation classes to broaden his cultural perspective, as if his ability to construct houses from the ground up with skill and precision was somehow less valuable than her ability to arrange gallery openings and write pretentious artist statements about emotional vulnerability. I started eagerly accepting social invitations I had been declining for months because Whitney considered them beneath her sophisticated standards and incompatible with the image she was trying to project, rediscovering the simple pleasure of spending time with people who appreciated honesty and genuine human connection over networking opportunities and social status advancement. The relief of no longer having to constantly defend my interests, my friends, or my middle-class background to someone who saw them as embarrassing obstacles to her social climbing was absolutely transformative for my mental health and overall happiness. I realized how much creative energy I had been wasting trying to meet her impossible standards for cultural sophistication while she offered nothing meaningful in return except relentless criticism and the dubious privilege of funding her lifestyle and artistic pretensions. 4 months later, I had completely transformed my life in ways that surprised even me, expanding my custom furniture business with 3 new major contracts and starting to date Elena, a warm elementary school teacher who proudly introduced me to her colleagues and family without any shame or hesitation about my middle-class background or practical career choice. Elena genuinely appreciated my craftsmanship and business acumen, often bringing her teacher friends to see my workshop and enthusiastically bragging about the beautiful dining table I had built specifically for her apartment, treating my practical skills as something to celebrate and admire rather than hide from sophisticated company or apologize for at social gatherings. The contrast with Whitney's attitude was absolutely stark, as Elena saw my woodworking talent as an attractive quality that demonstrated creativity, skill, and the ability to build something lasting and beautiful with my own hands. When Whitney ambushed me at Kevin's housewarming party, appearing suddenly and uninvited at my elbow while I was discussing weekend hiking plans with Elena and some mutual friends, she was visibly stunned by my obvious confidence and genuine happiness that had nothing whatsoever to do with her presence, approval, or validation. I noticed immediately how different she looked compared to her previous polished gallery appearance, with an underlying tension in her face and a desperate quality to her smile that suggested her professional and personal life hadn't been going nearly as smoothly as she had probably expected after discarding me so publicly and cruelly for networking opportunities. Her attempts to insert herself into our light-hearted conversation felt forced and increasingly awkward, especially when she tried to reference shared memories from our relationship in a transparent attempt to remind everyone present that we had once been intimate, which clearly made Elena uncomfortable and visibly annoyed our friends who had witnessed her previous manipulative behavior. When Whitney suggested privately that we step outside to talk and maybe explore the realistic possibility of trying again with better boundaries and improved communication skills, I responded with polite but absolutely firm indifference, explaining calmly that I had moved forward completely and was actively building something genuine and healthy with someone who actually valued what I brought to a relationship rather than seeing it as a social liability. The entire conversation was witnessed by our former mutual friends, who commented later with obvious relief on how much more authentic, relaxed, and genuinely happy I appeared since escaping her toxic influence and escaping the constant criticism of everything that made me fundamentally who I was as a person. Elena, who had heard the complete story about the gallery incident from Kevin before we started dating seriously, watched the interaction with quiet amusement and later told me she was genuinely impressed by how gracefully and maturely I handled someone who had clearly caused significant emotional damage through calculated cruelty. Whitney's obvious shock at my complete emotional independence and romantic fulfillment was apparent to everyone present, as she had apparently expected to find me still nursing wounds from her public rejection and possibly hoping desperately for reconciliation rather than absolutely thriving in a healthy relationship with someone who appreciated my character, values, and life goals. 8 months post-breakup, I had fully processed the systematic emotional manipulation and psychological damage Whitney had deliberately inflicted throughout our relationship, finally realizing with crystal clarity how she had systematically eroded my self-worth through constant criticism and calculated public shame designed to keep me grateful for her attention and afraid to demand better treatment. I understood now that her entire strategy had been to make me feel fundamentally inadequate and socially inferior so that I would never question her cruel behavior or seriously consider that I deserved significantly better than being someone's embarrassing secret hidden from important professional circles and networking opportunities. The clarity was both profoundly liberating and deeply infuriating as I recognized the calculated and manipulative nature of her behavior, how she had slowly and deliberately chipped away at my confidence in my interests, my friendships, and my career accomplishments until I began seriously questioning whether I was truly sophisticated or cultured enough to deserve genuine love and unconditional respect from a romantic partner. I was actively planning to propose to Elena, who consistently celebrated my business success and treated my professional achievements as shared victories rather than personal embarrassments that threatened her carefully constructed image in competitive professional settings where appearances mattered more than substance. When colleagues at my rapidly expanding woodworking shop noticed my dramatically increased confidence and remarkable business growth over the past year, I honestly credited learning to value myself properly and having the courage to walk away from toxic relationships that demanded I systematically diminish myself for someone else's social and professional benefit. Elena had patiently helped me understand that genuinely healthy partnerships involved consistent mutual support and authentic pride in each other's accomplishments rather than one person systematically undermining the other's self-worth for personal advancement and image management. Meanwhile, Whitney's new relationship with another struggling artist named Derek showed absolutely identical patterns of her being publicly embarrassed by his amateur status at gallery events, constantly criticizing his lack of professional connections and condescendingly suggesting he needed to dramatically elevate his artistic vision to match her supposedly sophisticated standards and cultural expectations. I learned through Kevin's reliable updates that she had begun treating Derek exactly as she had treated me during our worst periods, expressing visible frustration with his basic interests and aggressively pushing him to attend cultural events where she could network effectively while simultaneously making him feel intellectually inadequate for not instinctively understanding complex conceptual art theory and postmodern artistic movements. Her desperate social media attempts to rewrite our relationship history and strategically portray herself as the innocent victim of my sudden and inexplicable abandonment were systematically undermined when screenshots of her cruel gallery behavior and public humiliation tactics resurfaced among our mutual connections whenever she tried to play the wronged woman narrative to gain sympathy. Several people who had personally witnessed the original incident began courageously sharing their own disturbing stories about Whitney's consistently manipulative behavior and established pattern of ruthlessly using people for career advancement while treating them with obvious contempt and calculated cruelty designed to maintain psychological control. The professional reputation she had worked so desperately hard to build in the competitive local art community continued steadily deteriorating as more people came forward with remarkably similar experiences of her calculated cruelty and persistent willingness to publicly humiliate anyone who didn't serve her immediate professional aspirations or enhance her desired social status among influential gallery owners and collectors.